All right, perfect. All right, let's get started. This is the first of a series of lectures that we're gonna be running between now and April. I'm going to be kicking this off. This is the introduction to the wellness series. So before we dive in, maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Arvind Nishtala. I'm a cardiologist at Marin Health. I wear a few different hats professionally. I am the co-director of the cardiac rehab program with Dr. Ancock. I am one of the advanced cardiac imaging specialists at Marin Health. I am also a sports cardiologist, and part of that is working with athletes. When I say work with athletes, not just professional athletes, but all of you, because I believe that everyone is an athlete and should treat themselves like an athlete. I also wear a few hats on the personal front. I am a third culture kid. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that term before, but I grew up in a few different places. Born in India, mainly raised in Singapore, spent a few years in Japan, spent a few years in New Zealand, and then went to college here and fell in love here. And that's how I'm stuck here in Marin. But there's worse places to be, right? I write yogi here a little bit in jest, but also a little bit in truth, but also in gratitude, because I grew up as part of a Hindu family that that inculcated me in the importance of meditative practice and mindfulness, and I feel very grateful for that. Didn't think much of it as a kid, but now that I know the power of all this, much more grateful. I also take full advantage of the beautiful outdoors we have here in Marin. I'm a mountain biker, run the trails here, backpack. I am a plant-based eater, my vegetarian in my childhood, and now despite being plant-based, consider myself a big foodie. And then, I'm a huge fan of Liverpool Football Club. I don't think many of you know this or talk about this because soccer is not a big thing in the US, but every Saturday morning I'm catching a game. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. So these are a few things I want to cover. First, what is health? And then what is wellness? What is the health span versus the lifespan? I want to talk about the 6 pillars of wellness. And then I want to spread this word or share the message that all of you have agency in making change in your life. You are an agent of change, and I also want to emphasize the importance of community and the power of growing your community. And then I'm going to finish off with a little bit about who we are and how we can help as well. So let's start with what is health. So this is the definition of health from the World Health Organization in 1948. Defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This was in 1948. I think it still applies, but I think I like this definition of wellness. It was hard to find a good definition of wellness because it's a fairly amorphous or intangible concept. You kind of know what it means, but you can find it a challenge to define. So this is from the Global Wellness Institute. It's the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. There are 2 important aspects of this definition. First, wellness is not a passive or static state, but rather an active pursuit that is associated with intentions, choices, and actions as we work towards an optimal state of well-being. And second, that wellness is linked to holistic health. It's beyond physical health solely and incorporates many different dimensions that should work in harmony. Expanding on this a little bit more, wellness is multidimensional. So it's, again, like I said, not just physical health, but it's also your mental and emotional health. It's your spiritual growth, your social connection, and it's also your connection to the planet around us. Wellness is a continuum. So it doesn't, there's, the reason I put this graph up here is because I also want you to appreciate the limitations that we as Western medicine doctors, the limitations we face working in a traditional healthcare system. Traditional healthcare, the reasons a lot of you come and see me in clinic or see my partners in clinic is because you have a problem and we're going to try and fix it, right? It's episodic, it's corrective, it's very reactive. It's not proactive, it's not preventive, it's not holistic. So I think that's why I love that the wellness is a continuum, and you're constantly working towards an optimal state of well-being. Why do I care about this as a cardiologist? Well, cardiovascular disease, mainly driven by atherosclerosis, manifesting as heart attacks or strokes or coronary artery disease, is the #1 cause of death worldwide. 1 out of 3 deaths worldwide are due to cardiovascular disease. And so this graph is really interesting. Basically, what it tells me is 50% of men are going to have a cardiac event in their life before the age of 65. And 1/3 of women will have their first cardiac event before the age of 65. It's pretty devastating. It all happens because of atherosclerosis. So what is atherosclerosis? Atherosclerosis is disease of the walls of the arteries, right? It starts with a fatty streak that later consolidates into these inflammatory lesions called plaques. This whole process is silent over decades and manifests usually in one of 2 ways. It either leads to significant narrowing of the arteries, limiting blood flow. This can cause shortness of breath or chest pain, also known as angina, or the plaque can become unstable and rupture, causing a clot at this site, which ultimately blocks the vessel. This is a heart attack, okay? And I think the biggest thing about this graph that I want to show you, and I'm going to keep emphasizing in the next few slides, is that this process starts in the third, the third and fourth decades of life. And it's all silent, and it only manifests, 20, 30 years after that process starts, okay? So I remember seeing this picture back in medical school. This is an autopsy of a 24-year-old man who died in a motor vehicle accident. He was healthy up until that point, but this is one of his coronary arteries. And all this here is a giant piece of plaque in that artery. And it's not just plaque that formed last week, it is advanced plaque that formed years ago, okay? So, and then this graph here is also pretty powerful. I'm going to just point you to this dashed line at the top, okay? And this is just talking about the percent of people who have any sort of atherosclerotic lesion in their heart arteries on autopsy. And you can see here that even in your second decade of life, over 50% of people start having these lesions. And then in your third or fourth decades of life, do you really start developing these grade 3 or type 3 or 4 or 5 lesions that are considered advanced atherosclerotic plaques, okay? But we don't think about all this in our second, third, fourth decades of life, right? Because it doesn't manifest at that time. That's why early prevention is key. This requires a shift in mindset for all of us and how we approach this disease process. Next, so what is health span? Okay, so lifespan is pretty easy to define. It's the number of years that you live. So that's just on the bottom here, right? Health span is intuitively obvious, but a bit harder to define. For simplicity, I will say that health span is a measure of how well, not necessarily how long you live, okay? And my goal is to try and empower all of you to push your health span out as close to your lifespan as possible. I think this picture here will demonstrate that a little bit more. And I think about this concept called the marginal decade, which is the last decade of anyone's life. It can be in their 7th decade, 8th decade, 9th decade of life, but you kind of want to think about how you hope to be living in that last decade of life. How functional do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? Do you want to be able to carry your own groceries? Do you want to be able to fix things around the house? Do you want to be able to travel? Do you want to be able to are you able to pick a suitcase up and put it in the overhead compartment? Can you walk your dog? Can you play with your grandchildren? That's what health span is, okay? So how do we work on expanding your health span? I think that there's about six areas to improve health and well-being. And we're going to just go through all of them today. We're going to first start with diet and healthful eating. This is a powerful picture that was, first published in the 1990s. This is a coronary angiogram of a patient who had severe narrowing in the distal part of their left anterior descending artery. At this time, no stent was placed, but the patient made a dramatic change in diet and followed a plant-based diet for over 2 years. And they repeated the angiogram 3 years later. And look at this. that artery has essentially reconstituted. Pretty remarkable. I like to recommend, patients always ask me, what should I be eating? And I just say, I think about it as whole food and plant-based. It's an eating pattern that emphasizes a variety of nutrient-dense, minimally processed fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds. Eat a rainbow of color, focus on a variety of plant protein, choose whole grains, and stay hydrated. It's honestly not that complicated. If it looks unhealthy, it's probably not healthy. If it looks healthy, it's probably healthy. But let's dive into a little bit about where the evidence for all this is, okay? So this is a landmark study, like one of the most powerful nutrition studies that was done in the past 2 decades, looking at the impact of the Mediterranean diet on heart disease, stroke, and death from cardiovascular causes. So they followed 7,500 Spaniards for about 5 years, and they looked at survival or the incidence of death or heart disease or stroke over 5 years. And you can see here that this orange and green curves, which are essentially the Mediterranean diet, one is a focus on olive oil and one is a focus on nuts, significantly better outcomes than a control diet, which was not a Mediterranean diet. It also applies to Americans. This is a study of 12,000 Americans, and the x-axis here is a plant-based diet score. Okay, so the closer you are to the right, the higher your plant-based diet score is. You're following a better plant-based diet. And this y-axis is the hazard ratio for death or heart disease. You can see the further to the right you are, meaning the more plant-based you are, your risk for heart disease dramatically drops. Okay. This is in a study of veterans, a large study of veterans, about 150,000 veterans. And I want to focus on the blue lines here, okay? Again, the x-axis is a plant-based diet score, and the y-axis is the risk of developing heart disease or dying from heart disease. And so as you can see in this blue line here, whether you're European American, African American, the more plant-based your diet is, the dramatic, the risk reduction is pretty profound. On the flip side, this study here looked at processed meat intake on these 2 columns on the left, these 2 graphs on the left, and red meat intake, these 2 graphs on the right. And the greater processed meat intake or red meat intake one has, the risk of death, which is all-cause mortality, or the risk of developing heart disease or stroke goes up. So how does all this work? So, we think that, a healthful plant-based diet helps by controlling your traditional cardiovascular risk factors. It improves your cholesterol, it improves your blood sugar, your blood pressure, it decreases inflammation, improves your vascular health, even improves your microbiome, and obviously helps with weight management as well. And all of these in summation reduce your cardiovascular risk. Right? So coming back to what should I eat, right? Again, going back to eat a rainbow of color, fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole grains, eat a variety of plant protein, and stay hydrated. Beth is one of our registered dietitian nutritionists who specializes in cardiovascular health and lifestyle medicine, and she's going to be diving into the details on the power of nutrition in maintaining cardiovascular health, and she's going to be talking in a couple of weeks, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Okay, next is physical activity, okay? And so I think that movement is medicine, and those of you who know me, know that I always talk about this. This graph to me is really powerful. And when I saw it, it had a huge impact on how I talk to my patients. So on the left, these 2 graphs are for females. On the right, this is for males. And so the top graph here is looking at muscle mass, okay? And the bottom 2 graphs are looking at physical activity levels. And you can notice here that in general, the curves in all 4 tend to follow one pattern, right? They go up with age, they sort of stay stagnant for a period of time, and they all fall off a cliff roughly at about the same time. And when does that happen? Roughly at the age of 75. Muscle mass in males and females drops off dramatically at 75. Physical activity levels drops off dramatically at the age of 75. Now, it's hard to know what's the chicken, what's the egg here. But honestly, it doesn't matter, because I think the message I'm trying to share here is that, it's part of the aging process to lose muscle mass. It's part of the aging process to, to experience a decline in physical activity, but you have the power to stave that off. And that's what I want to empower you with the knowledge so you can take action. Fitness is the strongest prognostic marker of just living a long, healthy life. Okay. 122,000 patients in the study who are 53-year-old on average, and they're looking at the probability of survival. And you can see here that, if your physical fitness was low, you had a dramatically different survival than even if you were below average in terms of fitness or average. Now, there's not much of a difference between, being above average or elite. So no, I'm not expecting anyone to be above average or elite, but I'm expecting people to work towards getting away from being in this low bottom 25th percentile and moving up. This is another way to look at the same graph, okay? And I want to show you here that just going from being low to just being below average, which is from the bottom 25th percentile to like being 25th to 50th percentile, is a 50% reduction in mortality. It's you save yourself, the risk of death goes down by half. And this occurs whether you're a male or a female. So I hope this gives you a greater appreciation for how much improvement in mortality, but also health span comes from improving your fitness. So this comes back to me telling you again that you're an athlete. And what I mean by an athlete is, an athlete is someone who I believe sets goals and expectations and works towards them. And I think all of us are more than capable of that. And that's why I say that we're all athletes and should think of ourselves that way. Reminding you here again, this is the graph that I've shown you before. You want your healthy life years to last till the very end of your life. And this is for someone who's sedentary. So they start moving into this arena of dependence at a much earlier age than someone who has decided to work on their fitness and pushes out their fitness. So they stay independent for a lot longer time. Okay. So what are the four pillars of exercise? I think of the four pillars of exercise as strength, stability, using your aerobic fitness. So you're like treating yourself as a marathon runner. And then there's anaerobic fitness, which is like thinking of yourself like a sprinter. I think all of these are incredibly important in generally contributing to your entire, suite of cardiopulmonary fitness. And I think none of those should be compromised in any way. So if you want to even make this a little simpler, I would say strength, stability, and cardio. Stability, what does stability mean and how is it different from strength? I think about stability as the way in which you can control the force you exert on the world, and more importantly, how you can safely react to the forces the world exerts on you. Whereas strength is just raw power. So they're related, but they're still different concepts. In terms of exercise, I think of exercise as a stimulus to the body and a stress on the body, but not necessarily a bad stress. There's a zone, we call it the hormetic zone, in which the stimulus is good. It's a positive stimulus and results in a positive response and benefit to the body. But if you're not training the right way, or you're training too much, or you're training too aggressively, you can go beyond this and you can start having a damaging effect. So how much should you do? I think there are two questions that you can sort of ask yourself, like, am I recovering within 24 to 48 hours? And am I improving? If no, you might be doing too much, maybe even doing too little. But if yes, you should stay the course. We do here at Marin Health, as part of the work that I do in sports cardiology, we offer VO2 max testing and exercise training prescriptions and body composition testing. So if any of you are interested in this, you can ask your doctor. We work with a lot of our patients in understanding their fitness and what their fitness zones are to give them a training prescription, and then retest them months down the road to see what sort of progress they've made. Matt is an exercise physiologist in cardiac rehab with us and a certified strength and conditioning coach. He has over a decade of experience in sport performance and personal training, and has, thankfully for us, taken this skill set to our cardiac rehab program. He's going to be talking a lot more about physical activity, exercise, training principles on March 6th, so be sure to tune in for that as well. Okay, next up, I'm going to be talking a little bit about presence and mindfulness and stress. So stress. So the actual definition of stress is defined as the response to any change or demand. But I don't think any of us have ever thought or would define stress that way. I think a definition that resonates more with us is a feeling experienced when one perceives that the demands put on them exceed the resources one is able to mobilize. But just remember, I think the reason I bring up the real definition and the definition that we perceive is because not all stress is bad. There are positive stressors that allow us to grow positively, and then there are stressors that do wear us down. The impact of negative stress on our body, I think all of you know, it affects all systems of our body. It results in cardiovascular disease, systemic inflammation, gastrointestinal disease, mental illness. It also adversely affects our functioning as social beings, lead to substance use, poor work performance, relationship issues, disruption of sleep, recovery, all of that. How does stress affect heart disease? This study done by a bunch of researchers at Columbia, where they looked at 23 different studies, including about 120,000 subjects, essentially found that if someone had a perceived high stress in their life, so this is an individual, a research participant saying, I feel like I have a high degree of stress in my life, they had a 27% higher risk of developing heart disease or stroke. So high perceived stress is really, really detrimental to our health. Well, on the flip side, does having an optimistic mindset help? Let me first define optimism. Optimism is not just this belief that everything will turn out to be all right. I want you guys to think of optimism as a conviction that things can be made better through action. So researchers from Brown and Mount Sinai set out to answer a question of whether having a mindset of optimism is associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular events and death. And check this out. So this is first the association between optimism and cardiovascular events. And just look at the box that I've sort of highlighted here. This is looking at the data in aggregate. And you can see here that there's a 35% reduced risk of developing heart disease if you have an optimistic mindset. When you look at death from any cause, a 14% decrease in the risk of death with an optimistic mindset. These findings are honestly remarkable. It shows that you are the agent of change and is absolutely possible and doable to change your perspective and outlook on your health and your life. In order to understand stress, we also need to understand emotions. We live in an era of feelings. Everyone is constantly talking about their emotions. They talk about the way they feel. They talk about the way others make them feel. It's all we hear about. So I think we should understand emotions a little bit first. Emotions proceed from a part of the brain called the limbic system. The limbic system has one real function, which is to translate the things that you perceive from your surroundings into emotions. Why did this even exist? It's a product of evolution. You know, the reason we feel fear, right? It was because our ancestors, when they faced the saber-toothed tiger, it was necessary to feel fear to trigger the fight or flight response. Similarly, you know, when we dig into the back of the refrigerator and dig out a box of moldy leftovers, it makes us feel disgusted. And that's protecting us from eating something that could be harmful to us. So these are evolutionarily programmed responses. However, in the current day and age, responding solely to emotions is not a great recipe for success. So the limbic system, the way I think about it is that it's nothing more than a factory for your emotions. What we need to do is we need to take the information perceived by the limbic system and then bring it here to the front of the brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex. And it's the most evolved part of our brains. It's what separates us from other animals. And this is where we can decide how to react. So understanding emotions in this way that emotions are not just nice to have or terrible to have. They're all worth appreciating because they're inputs or signals to your body from your environment, but you can manage them by taking your emotions from here, not reacting while they're here, but bringing them here and then reacting once you've processed them. So this whole idea is called metacognition, or being aware of what you're feeling. You don't want the limbic system in charge. There's a few ways to practice and develop mindfulness. There's meditation, breathing techniques, movement, nature, journaling, pet therapy, laughter, giving back to your community. These practices can help you develop a moment by moment awareness of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and a gentle acceptance of whatever comes into your awareness in the moment. The more you practice mindfulness, the more you will come to understand your thoughts, feelings, or sensations and how they influence each other, as well as your mood and the way you respond to the world. This sort of healing practice is actually really powerful in terms of the impacts it has on your body. It reduces one's blood pressure, depression, anxiety. It deactivates the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response, and it increases the relaxation response. It promotes sleep. It promotes improved social connections, and all the things that we care about as cardiologists: blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol. All those improve dramatically with mindfulness practice. Praveena is an Ayurvedic wellness practitioner, a yoga therapist, and a registered dietitian nutritionist with over 20 years of experience in stress management. She will be giving an enthralling talk on this topic on March 20th at 6 p.m. Stay tuned. Please show up for that. She can describe this far more and in a far better detail than I can. Okay, and lastly, love and community. So this part I have to admit that I had trouble with, because it's harder to talk about. It's a little bit more nebulous. It's more vague, and I struggled with what to say here. But I think as I thought about it a little more, I think it goes without saying that it always starts with you. Self-love is so important, and it means that you have an appreciation, an affinity, and a positive regard for yourself. It's closely related to self-esteem, self-compassion. When you have a strong sense of self-love, you understand your own value and you treat yourself in a loving way. You build resilience, you build patterns of behavior that promote physical and mental health. A lot of you who are here today, a lot of you who have had heart disease or had encounters in the hospital, or have had to see cardiologists for a variety of reasons, I think many of you are living through a pretty transformative experience. I want you to think about this, your illness or your disease process as an initiation into this whole journey here. Comprehending one's mortality can be extremely sobering, but it can also be extremely powerful. And the reason I think that's the case is because, it awakens you to what is most important to you. You realize what is most important. You're ready and willing to shed the excess baggage. So learning self-care, body-mind skills can really renew your trust in your heart and body again and allow you to grow from experiences like this. Claire is an expert in integrative cardiology and will teach us about which mind-body techniques and what sequence seem to be effective for us to decrease our reactivity to stress and increase our capacity to build greater resiliency through cognitive and emotional self-regulation, as well as meaningful connection. So next, in terms of connection, I'm going to talk about the power of relationships. There's this world-famous study that was started in 1938 at Harvard. A group of people at Harvard, from the Harvard Group of Adult Development, tracked the lives of 725 young men in 1938 in Boston. Half of them were students at Harvard College, and half of them were low-income teenage boys in Boston who were not college educated. They followed them every 3 to 5 years. They met with them, they performed interviews, and they asked them a whole series of questions, and they got a lot of data. About 2 years ago, they finally published, their comprehensive analysis of everything. And interestingly, they found one very clear finding. It's not wealth, it's not intelligence, it's not social class, it's none of that really matters for happiness. It's strong relationships are what make for a happy life. It's the robustness of our bonds that most determines whether we feel fulfilled. And that's why I urge you to grow your community. And I believe that we at Marin Health are a platform for you to do that. This is one of our heart walks that was organized by our cardiac rehab and wellness team. We do this on a frequent basis. We continue to seek ways to engage in the community. So if you have ideas and suggestions, we'll be happy to take them. We want to spread the word that this is important, and we want you to join us. On that note, I'm going to share with you our team here. So this is our Marin Health Cardiac Rehab and Wellness team. This is, I think you've seen a few faces here, but there are a few more whose pictures you haven't seen yet. So Dr. Ancock on the right here is one of my co-directors and one of the cardiologists in our group. Phenomenal. He's been doing this for a lot longer than I have, and he's really taught me the power of this beyond traditional medicine that we practice on a day-to-day basis. Megan is one of our exercise physiologists. Nancy is one of our onboarding specialists, and goes without saying that Max Drake is our fearless leader, and none of this would be possible without him. What do we offer in our cardiac rehab in terms of services? There are a few different services. So we have what we call phase 2 cardiac rehab, which is our traditional cardiac rehab program that focuses on restoring function to patients after they've had a cardiac event. It's usually a 12-week program that's based on improving cardiovascular fitness. It's covered by insurance. We also have a smaller but very robust intensive cardiac rehab program that incorporates exercise, nutrition, stress management, group support to reverse the damage of heart disease and other comorbidities. This is a 9-week program that's very intensive with multiple sessions a week. And this is our crown jewel of our cardiac rehab program. And then we're launching a new phase 3 advanced cardiac rehab program, which is sort of, essentially I would almost treat it as personal training with wraparound services. This is for anyone to join. You don't need insurance. You pay out of pocket, and you come in, and we will take care of you. We will work on strength and conditioning, and you will have access to our nutritionists and mental health counselors. This is all available through phase 3 cardiac rehab, and we will be launching this soon. Okay, in conclusion, so going back to the objectives that we talked about, health is great, but I hope that I've sort of proved to you that wellness is better. I hope that I've also given you the idea of what health span is and why we would like for you to push your health span out to your lifespan as close to your lifespan as possible. I want you to spend the last years of your lives doing all the things you want to do. We talked about the various pillars of wellness, and you will get dedicated lectures from all the subject matter experts in the coming weeks. Importantly, I want you to understand and realize and appreciate that you are an agent of change. You have agency. You can make change in your life. You need community, and we at Marin Health can help you in any way that you would like. Thank you so much. It was honestly a joy and an honor to give this talk, and I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that we as doctors in our day-to-day work, we love having these longitudinal relationships with our patients and seeing them, from the first time we meet them in the hospital to seeing them years, even decades later, thriving. But I think one thing that we sort of appreciate or we recognize is that the structure created for us in our traditional healthcare roles does not allow us to talk about this on or really dive into the details of this in our 15-minute visits with each other. And that's why I'm grateful to have been given the platform to talk about this with all of you. And I hope that you find this helpful. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions. You can put that in the Zoom chat, or you can also email me. I will be happy to share that email in a different, through Max if interested. Okay, thank you all so much.